Did you know Florida is sitting on a giant limestone sponge? Or that a man in Seffner, Florida was asleep in his own bedroom when the floor opened up beneath him into a sinkhole nearly 100 feet deep? Florida looks like paradise from a postcard. But once you get past the beaches, you'll find ground that's been dissolving, flooding, sinking, and rebuilding itself long before a single road was ever poured on top of it. Number 6 on this list is one of Florida's best-kept secrets. A single highway built in 1928 that caused the ground itself to start disappearing. And by number 1, you'll understand why Florida is built on some of the most unstable ground in the entire country. Number 7. Sinkholes. Once enough limestone dissolves away, solid ground becomes far less solid than it appears. This can create sinkholes, giant cavities in the ground that open when the surface layer collapses. Geologists classify Florida's sinkholes into 3 types. The first is solution sinkholes. Solution sinkholes form slowly right at the surface, leaving a shallow bowl that deepens gradually over years. Next is cover subsidence sinkholes, which appear gradually as loose soil settles into openings below, sometimes over months or years, and are often mistaken for ordinary settling until someone measures how far the depression has spread. Then there's the cover collapse sinkhole, the one that opens with almost no warning and swallows whatever is on top of it in seconds, usually because a water-filled cavity that had been quietly supporting it collapses when the ground above suddenly loses pressure during a drought or a heavy storm. In February 2013, in Seffner, Florida, a man named Jeff Bush was asleep when his bedroom floor gave way beneath him. Officials at the time described the hole as roughly 30 feet wide and around 100 feet deep. Rescue crews arrived, but the ground kept collapsing, and they couldn't safely reach him. His body was never recovered. The county demolished the house and filled the hole, and it has reopened more than once since, in the same spot, each time forcing officials to re-fence the property and reassess whether the neighboring homes are still safe. Seffner was shocking, but it wasn't the biggest. On the evening of May 8, 1981, a small depression opened at an intersection in Winter Park, Florida, and dramatically widened through the following day into a sinkhole roughly 350 feet across and 80 feet deep. Total damage was estimated at $2 to $4 million. It swallowed a house, the deep end of a municipal swimming pool, several Porsches from a nearby repair shop, and pieces of 2 streets. Locals gathered to watch it happen, and news crews filmed cars sliding into the widening hole over the course of the day. Engineers eventually stabilized the bottom with dirt and concrete, and it eventually filled with water, becoming a permanent lake called Lake Rose, one that's still there today, exactly where the neighborhood used to be. Near Gainesville, there is a sinkhole you can actually walk into. Devil's Mill Hopper is a sinkhole around 120 feet deep and roughly 500 feet across, with a staircase built straight down into it. Walk to the bottom, and you're passing through layer after layer of exposed geology, one step at a time. None of this is unusual in Florida. Florida is widely considered among the most sinkhole-prone states in the entire country, concentrated heavily in the central part of the peninsula, where the limestone sits closest to the surface. During one 5-year stretch, Florida's Office of Insurance Regulation calculated sinkhole-related insurance claims at roughly $1.4 billion. And the same porous limestone causing it is also the reason heavy groundwater pumping can pull salt water inland and underground, contaminating wells that worked fine for decades. This becomes a slow, invisible version of collapse, detected through routine water quality testing rather than by any visible change at the surface. Florida's ground doesn't just suddenly collapse sometimes, it's slowly being swallowed from below, whether you can see it from the surface or not. Number 6. Everglades drainage. The Tamiami Trail, completed in 1928 after more than a decade of construction, connected Tampa to Miami for the first time and was celebrated as an engineering triumph. But nobody fully understood the ecological impact until decades later, and it took nearly a century of bridge building and roadbed removal to start restoring what a 2-lane highway had cut off. In 1948, Congress approved the Central and Southern Florida Project, which at the time was the largest civil works project in the country. Over the next 2 decades, the Army Corps built more than 1,000 miles of canals and levees to control flooding and open land for farms and cities, turning unreliable swampland into some of the most valuable real estate in the country, almost overnight. On paper, it worked exactly as designed. It also cut off about half of the Everglades' original water flow, a trade-off nobody fully understood at the time. Once those wetlands were drained, the waterlogged peat soil that had been underwater for thousands of years was suddenly exposed to the open air. It began to oxidize and disappear, a process called land subsidence. In parts of the Everglades agricultural area, several feet of ground have been permanently lost, leaving lower ground that now depends on pumps and levees just to stay dry. Since 2000, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan has been trying to undo pieces of the very system built in 1948, reconnecting canals, raising sections of roadway, and building new reservoirs to send cleaner water south again. It's the largest ecosystem restoration effort ever attempted anywhere in the world, coordinated across federal, state, and tribal agencies, and it's expected to take decades and tens of billions of dollars to make substantial progress. Recent construction phases, including the removal of several miles of the old Tamiami Trail roadbed, have already increased water flow into the northern Everglades by measurable amounts. Proof that the damage is at least partially reversible if the state keeps paying for it. Florida spent 20 years building a system that broke its own wetlands. It's now spending far longer trying to carefully put the pieces back. Number 5. Lake Okeechobee. Before highways and suburbs covered South Florida, water flowed south from Lake Okeechobee as a slow-moving sheet, historically spreading across roughly 11,000 square miles on its way to Florida Bay. It wasn't a river with banks. Writer Marjorie Stoneman Douglas called it a river of grass, and the name fits. The water moves so slowly it could take months to complete the journey, spreading gradually across sawgrass prairies, cypress domes, and scattered tree islands along the way. Thick layers of peat soil, built from thousands of years of decaying marsh plants, held that moisture like a giant soggy reservoir. During wet seasons, the wetlands stored huge volumes of rainwater. During dry seasons, they slowly released it back into the landscape, protecting everything downstream from flooding without the need for engineered flood control systems, while supporting alligators, wood storks, and the endangered Florida panther along the way. In 1928, a hurricane pushed Lake Okeechobee over its earthen banks and killed an estimated 2,500 to 3,000 people, mostly farm workers in low-lying communities nearby, in one of the deadliest natural disasters in U.S. history. And so sudden that many of the dead were buried in mass graves because there was no time to identify them individually. The Army Corps of Engineers responded with an initial levee system in the 1930s, then expanded it after another major hurricane in 1947. What exists today, renamed the Herbert Hoover Dike, is a 143-mile earthen embankment that encircles nearly the entire lake, and the Corps has spent decades and close to $1 billion rehabilitating it, after discovering seepage and stability problems in its foundation. The dike protects the towns around Okeechobee today. It also sealed the lake off from the natural flow that used to feed the swamp to the south, which is the exact trade-off Florida keeps making with its own water. Contain the danger here and starve something else downstream. Number 4. Coastal flooding. Off much of Florida's Gulf Coast, the seafloor stays shallow for more than 100 miles before it drops off. When a hurricane's winds hit that shallow shelf, the water has nowhere to go but up and forward, piling into a storm surge instead of spreading into the deep ocean. Combine that with Florida's flat terrain, and the surge doesn't stop at the coastline. It keeps traveling inland for miles before it finally loses momentum. It's a mechanism most coastal states don't have to deal with in the same way, because most coastal states don't have a 100-mile ramp sitting just offshore. And here's the part that should really worry you. It isn't only hurricanes that put Florida underwater. Along the coast, the Atlantic and the Gulf push in twice a day through ordinary tides. And during unusually high king tides, seawater floods streets under a completely clear sky with no storm anywhere nearby. Rising sea levels are also pushing saltwater further into the same aquifers that supply drinking water. Add in a shallow water table that's already close to the surface most of the year, and Florida can flood from 3 directions at once: rain from above, groundwater rising from below, and ocean water pushing in from the side, without any storm involved at all. And when Hurricane Michael made landfall near Mexico Beach in October 2018 as a Category 5 storm, the National Hurricane Center measured storm surge inundation of roughly 9 to 14 feet above ground in parts of Bay and Gulf counties. Nearly 1,600 of Mexico Beach's 1,700 buildings were damaged or destroyed, and recovery was still visibly ongoing years later as residents rebuilt street by street. Places that seemed to be far enough inland found out they weren't safe at all. Michael wasn't even the record. The 1935 Labor Day hurricane struck the Florida Keys with a central pressure lower than any hurricane recorded before or since at U.S. landfall, and sustained winds estimated near 185 miles per hour. It hit a chain of low-lying islands with no highway evacuation route built for that kind of speed. A rescue train sent to evacuate residents and veterans was swept off its tracks by the surge before it could finish the trip. Hundreds of people, many of them World War I veterans working on a road project, died in the storm. Nearly a century later, it's still the standard that every other Florida hurricane gets measured against. Then there's Hurricane Andrew. It struck South Florida in August 1992 as a Category 5, destroying more than 25,000 homes and exposing the fact that the state had over 400 separate local building codes, with almost no consistent enforcement between them. Investigators later found that shortcut construction and weak inspections explain why so many homes failed. The aftermath led to a single unified Florida building code in 2002, requiring impact-resistant windows and stricter inspections statewide, now considered one of the toughest hurricane codes in the country. Florida didn't build for its own weather until a storm forced it to, and it took a Category 5 to make the lessons stick. Number 3. Limestone. Florida isn't sitting on granite or bedrock like most of the country. It's sitting on limestone, the compressed remains of an ancient shallow sea that covered the region over a vast span of time. In some places, that limestone platform runs thousands of feet deep before it hits anything else. The entire visible peninsula is just the top layer of a much taller formation buried underneath it. Unlike dense rock, limestone is full of holes, cracks, and connected pockets that let water move through it almost everywhere. Geologists call this a karst landscape, and Florida is one of the largest examples on the planet. Karst regions exist elsewhere in the world, but few of them have an entire modern state built directly on top of one at this scale. With tens of millions of people living, driving, and building on ground that behaves less like a solid slab and more like a saturated block of soft cheese. Rainwater absorbs carbon dioxide on its way down and turns slightly acidic. A weak acid, but given a few thousand years, weak is more than enough. That water has been eating through the limestone continuously, slowly carving tunnels and hollow chambers that nobody can see from the surface. Most of them sit quietly under neighborhoods, highways, and parking lots, widening by fractions of an inch a year in a process no one above ground can feel happening until it's too late. South Florida sits on a slightly younger layer, the Miami limestone, formed during a period when sea levels were higher than they are today. And it's just as porous. Beneath it, massive groundwater systems like the Floridan Aquifer and the Biscayne Aquifer move enormous volumes of fresh water through that porous rock constantly. The Floridan Aquifer's carbonate layers alone run more than 3,000 feet thick in places, which is why the water table across much of South Florida sits only a few feet below the surface, sometimes close enough that a single heavy rain shower is enough to saturate a front yard from underneath. The entire slate is sitting on what amounts to a giant underground sponge, and the ground was never dry to begin with. Number 2. Mangroves. Long before concrete seawalls lined Florida's coast, mangroves did the same job for free. Their tangled root systems trap sediment, stabilize shorelines, and absorb wave energy before it ever reaches land. As storm surge pushes inland, a healthy mangrove forest can take a meaningful bite out of its energy before it reaches a single house. They also create sheltered nurseries where young fish, shrimp, and crabs get their start before moving into open water, an entire ecosystem working underneath the same roots that are holding the shoreline together. As Florida's waterfront became more valuable through the 20th century, developers cleared large stretches of mangrove forests for better views and replaced them with seawalls that need constant, expensive upkeep to hold back the same water the trees used to absorb for free. Nobody realized what they were tearing out until the storms got worse and the concrete bills started arriving. Today, restoring mangrove shoreline has become one of Florida's more effective flood defenses. Cheaper than a seawall, and it grows back on its own if given the chance, unlike concrete, which just keeps needing to be re-poured after every storm. Today, many communities are working to restore the natural coastal defenses that were removed decades ago. In many cases, the solution is bringing the mangroves back. Number 1. Barrier Islands. Florida's barrier islands aren't rock. They're built almost entirely from sand, shaped continuously by waves, tides, and storms, growing slowly in calm weather and torn apart or reshaped in hours during a hurricane. That movement is the entire point. It's what protects the bays and wetlands sitting behind them. And every hurricane that makes landfall reshapes these islands a little differently, eroding sand from one stretch and depositing it somewhere else along the coast in an endless, ongoing cycle. Cities across Florida still spend enormous sums on beach nourishment, trucking or pumping in new sand every few years just to replace what the last storm carried off. Sand that would have simply relocated somewhere else along the coast if nothing had been built there in the first place. From Miami Beach to the Florida Keys, entire economies now sit on top of islands that technically don't want to stay where they are. Florida put permanent cities, hotels, and highways on landforms designed by nature to migrate. It's been paying to hold them still ever since, and the ocean has never once agreed to the deal. So why do people keep building there? Florida has no state income tax, warm weather nearly year-round, and hundreds of miles of coastline drawing well over 100 million visitors a year, which is exactly why millions of people keep moving there, despite everything mentioned in this video. Boating, fishing, and year-round outdoor life have made it one of the largest tourism economies in the country, and the population keeps climbing, even as the underlying risks remain largely hidden beneath the surface. Homeowners insurance costs more in Florida than almost anywhere else in the country, even after recent reforms brought new insurers back into the market and pushed some rates down for the first time in years. For over a decade, homeowners in the state watched premiums climb far faster than the national average, driven by hurricane risk and years of costly litigation that forced several major insurers to pull back or leave entirely. The state that has the most reasons to leave keeps growing faster than almost anywhere else in the country. But every part of the state that stays above water does so because of a pump, a levee, a seawall, or a building code written after the last disaster. And none of it is permanent. All of it requires upkeep indefinitely. Dikes need rehabilitation, aquifers need monitoring for saltwater creep, barrier islands need fresh sand, and every building code eventually gets tested by the next storm that's worse than the one it was written for. Florida isn't stable ground that people happen to build on. It's unstable ground that an entire state has agreed to keep holding together. One storm, one code update, and one pump at a time. And for more stories of location fascination, make sure to hit that subscribe button.